Note to self, learn to fight.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Introversion Podcast. This is a sad episode, but it's been a couple weeks now, so it's not even so much I'm overcome with sadness about this, but as you all know, so it's old news now at this point, but for me, it's I'm doing what like George Floyd last year, all that craziness happened, and then I didn't really say anything about it online, social media, podcasting, anything for a couple weeks. And finally I did, and I did a whole dedicated episode about it. And similarly now with the untimely passing of Norm Macdonald, I was really sad. I was really bummed out for a couple days there. And I had mixed feelings about going down the rabbit hole, like watching a lot of old videos of Norm and, just different stand-up bits and interviews and stuff. And I don't know, I just feel like I couldn't watch that much of it the first couple days afterwards. I think I just was absorbing the impact of what had just happened, with Norm dying. And, I guess that's me. I guess that's how I process things. It's like I get hit by something, a tragedy or whatever, and I guess I get numb, But it's not necessarily that I don't feel anything. I feel a lot. It's just I don't have the words to express. It's kind of just a jumble of feelings, and I kind of go through all of the emotions. I guess it's kind of like going through the phases of grief or whatever, but it's crazy to think about, right? It's like when celebrities die, when people die, it's like we don't know them personally, but when certain people die, whether you knew them or not personally, it just affects you, especially if they are a hero to you or an idol or somebody, somebody who you look up to, somebody who you aspire to be, or, they're an inspiration to you, and then they're gone. So yeah, it just hit me, and I was dealing with that for the first couple days, just like really bummed out for a couple days there. And, slowly, surely, I think maybe 2 or 3 days later, I think my first, step down this rabbit hole or whatever was, watching Steven Crowder's coverage of, he did a dedicated episode on remembering Norm. And there was a lot of things there that he said I really appreciated in that episode, because when you look at Norm's career, when you look at his personality, when you look at like who he was as a comedian, but also as a human being, right? He's a mysterious figure, and I think a lot of people, as they do, a lot of people are super opinionated about everybody and anybody and anything. And I think a lot of people, obviously a lot of people didn't like him. A lot of people didn't find him funny. A lot of people were offended by him. A lot of people were upset by him. And these are the kind of things that Crowder brought up in his tribute episode. And I'll include a link. I'm going to include a couple links in the show notes today. One is to that Steven Crowder tribute episode to Norm, because I thought they did a really good job, not just showing a couple clips and laughing, but like really kind of, the gravitas of his whole life and his whole essence, and I think that when we think about losing somebody like Norm, it's like, obviously, again, I don't have a personal relationship with him, but it's just kind of like he was a force, he was a comedic force. And I when I think about what's happening in society now and sort of the decay of logic and rationality and reason, and, comedy is, there's a lot of reasons to turn to comedy, like if you're sick, if you're hurting, if you're lonely, if you're depressed, like comedy can heal a lot of ails, or even if it doesn't heal, it allows you to cope and to deal with all the shit in life, and that's why I really gravitate toward comedians, and specifically certain comedians who are kind of dark, and they don't pull punches, and they just speak, off the cuff or from the heart, and they're kind of just like, well, fuck it, and Norm was one of those guys, where and I can give you examples, but like, he just wanted to be funny, and I mean, he was a naturally funny guy. I think in an interview I heard recently, he said that Chris Farley was probably the funniest guy who he knew. And no matter what he did, he was always just funny. He just oozed being hilarious, and everybody kind of loved him. And regardless of whether they were old or young, male, female, whatever, like people just would laugh at Chris Farley. He was just a naturally funny guy. With Norm, maybe not so much. I think Norm was more of, I think a lot of people describe him as a comedic genius, and I would definitely look at him in that light. And it's really funny. Like when you watch his material, when you watch his bits, it's like, in a way, it's kind of like he had his own formula, and it's a very simple formula. And he would kind of just do the same thing every time in a slightly different way, but you kind of knew what you were going to get with Norm. It's kind of like he's a shock value comedian, but the shock is coming, which makes it less shocking, but you still love it. It's kind of like, like if I eat a pint of Bananas Foster ice cream, I know I love it, and it doesn't taste differently than I remember it, or it's nothing new about it, but it's like, I fucking love it. Not to compare the great Norm Macdonald with a pint of ice cream, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like you know what you're getting with Norm, but what you're getting is this certain quality that only he brings to the table in his own way. And, that's what I love about a lot of these great comedians that have lived. What's really, sometimes I sit there and I study Louis C.K. and I study Chappelle and I listen to what they say, and like sometimes it's like it's the intonation, it's the timing, the cues. It's like you could literally just read a script of Louis C.K.'s material or Dave Chappelle's material or Chris Rock's material. You could just sit there and read it, and nobody would laugh at it, because you're the one delivering it, not Chris Rock or Louis C.K., and obviously they've been doing it for so long, they've developed it into a sort of methodical art form, but I don't know. Besides the fact I love comedy for the reasons that I've mentioned, like it's always been a form of escape for me, or, when I look at, even at a young age, like when I just look at my life or the world and things don't make sense or whatever, it's like, it's almost like you can look at all of life as a tragedy and be sad about it, about everything that goes wrong in your life and everything that makes you sad. You can cry about it and you can be bummed out and sad about it. Or you can take the complete opposite side of the coin approach, which is to laugh at it, laugh at the absurdity of life, laugh at the pain, really, whether it's the pain, alcoholism or addiction, or, people around you suffering or you yourself suffering. It's like, there's humor. This is how I look at it. There's always humor to be found in any situation. And again, this is as much a tribute right now to Norm Macdonald as it is me just talking about the role of comedy in my life and the role of comedy in society, which is why obviously I'm a huge free speech advocate, and it bums me out when I see comedians under attack, and I feel happy when I see certain comedians who don't shy away from the conflict and they stand up for what they believe in, even if what they believe in is just to be a comedian, to just try to be funny because it's in their blood and that's what they do and that's their passion and that's all they want to do in life is be funny, make people laugh, and with Norm, sometimes I get this impression that for him, it wasn't even about making everybody else laugh, but it was more in his mind, like the art form of what he was doing. And he was just like, I want to be funny. I think this is funny, so I'm going to say it, and it often came at great expense for him. And, the classic example is like, look, he's funny and popular and whatever. And he's doing Weekend Update at Saturday Night Live. And from the stories and, things I've been hearing and watching all these interviews and everything lately, it really sounded like they told him, do not make any more O.J. Simpson jokes about him being a murderer and, committing double homicide. And he just kept doing it, And I think he has a rebellious spirit, just like how I have a rebellious spirit. But I think the fact that they didn't want him to do it, they wanted him to just not talk about that subject anymore and find some other material, but he just kept doing it. I think partially it was to rebel against people telling him not to do something, because it's like, what the fuck are you? Like, I'm gonna say whatever I want to say, and I respect that aspect. But I think also, like, the fact that they didn't want him to say it and he kept saying the same kind of jokes over and over again, to him it was amusing. It was funny. And as I watch it now, like compilation videos of Norm talking about O.J. Simpson being a murderer and all this stuff, like, it's the pummeling, it's the beating a dead horse and then beating it some more and killing it, and dead horse. It's like, Family Guy, the humor in Family Guy, they do that a lot. Like, they just, when he hurts his knee and he's like, ah, and they just drag it on and on and on. And it's like, you'll often go through the waves of laughter of like, it's funny. And then you kind of like, all right, that's enough. And then they keep going with it. And then somehow a laugh will kick back in. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they're still doing this. And like, or when he's fighting the chicken or whatever all over the city and fighting endlessly. But like, it was kind of that effect, I feel like, by Norm, just with the constant O.J. Simpson jokes. And the fact that he could turn any joke. I think there was one joke he did about the Pope. And
the changing role of the Catholic Church as it approaches the 21st century. The book is entitled, God Himself Told Me That O.J. is Guilty.
Something else, a Stephen King novel, and all this. Somehow we would bring it back to O.J. Simpson being a murderer. Like, to me, that was part of the comedic genius, It was just like... And it almost wouldn't have mattered that much, or wouldn't have been as funny if it weren't for the fact that they were telling him not to do it, So, but it's the kind of thing where I don't even know that a lot of people knew that this was what was happening, that there was pressure on his career, that he was going to get fired, and then he did get fired, whatever. I just don't think the average person really paid that much attention to what was going on behind the scenes, and really didn't even care, whether they laughed at his jokes or not at Weekend Update or not. Like, people just didn't really care. So it's like, whatever. But looking back on it now, the principle of that to me is like, wow, I really respect Norm Macdonald for sticking to his guns and his passion. And I think his passion was just to be funny. It was comedy, for comedy's sake. And, I listened to a Bob Saget tribute video, and it's really heartfelt, really emotional, and I got emotional listening to it. This was probably 3 or 4 or 5 days after Norm died, and I loved listening to what Bob Saget was saying. And he didn't talk as much about his comedy. He talked more about Norm as a person and as a friend, and he talked about how he loved Norm, and Norm loved him, and you could feel that sadness to lose something like that. And, I don't know, like it touched me on a number of levels. You start thinking about people in your life, you start thinking about people you've known. And even as introverted as I am, as deep of a person I am, sometimes I feel like it leads me to be very isolated and alone in my thinking and overthinking of everything, and I don't mean to say this in a condescending way, just like with Norm, like, and I want to touch on some things Norm said in another interview, and people would look at him like, are you depressed, or you sound so arrogant or condescending, or you think you're above us? And it's like, no, that's not the point. Point is, like, wherever you are on a level, it's not a competition, but I do feel like I am a person of depth, and I hate small talk, and I just hate dilly-dallying around, wasting time, chit-chatting with people.
I think I would talk to some people, but I'm not much interested in small talk.
Where you could talk with somebody for 20 minutes and it was a complete waste of 20 minutes of your life when you really stop and think about it. Although that's the whole point. People don't stop and think about it. They just continue and continue and continue that for so many hours and days and years of their life. But yeah, I mean, that level of depth that you could sense from Norm. Like for me, it's funny how people perceive people differently. Like people, I'm sure there's a lot of social justice warriors and people out there who heard a soundbite from Norm here and there and think, oh, that guy, what an old school patriarchal chauvinist white male, of course, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, no, those are people who didn't really grasp Norm Macdonald or what he was doing. And I don't even claim to be that person who knows Norm Macdonald and everything he was doing. Like, I enjoyed what he was doing. I have great respect for it. I can see some of the genius in what he was doing. I can listen to the other comedians talk about him, how they had such respect for him as a human being, but also what he was doing comedically. Like, I can put all of this together in my mind and come to a conclusion of like, wow, you know, Norm was great and he will be missed, you know? But I think in kind of this short attention span ADD society, a lot of people, I mean, it makes sense to me why a lot of people wouldn't really like him or wouldn't really care for his brand of comedy, because, like, you know, a lot of his stories were really long and drawn out, you know, and sometimes with no punchline or whatever. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like, you know, I've never really had much relationships. I mean, I had no relationships with my grandparents. I never really knew them, any of them. And, you know, I had an uncle or two here or there who I think my one uncle, when I was a kid, we went to Disney World. My mom's brother, like at that time, he was like a best friend to me for some reason for a short period of time. I just loved that guy and he was a funny guy. But outside of that, I don't really feel like I've ever had that much of a bond with my uncles and aunts up there. So it's interesting when you come across somebody like Norm Macdonald, who's kind of like this creepy uncle, or like, you know, I wouldn't say a father figure at all with him, but he's just kind of like, you know, he's just kind of that like old guy, you know, he's just that old guy and, you know, just kind of pontificating and, you know, just kind of like, back in my day, you know. So I don't know. I just kind of enjoyed that, you know, maybe because there was that absence of that kind of person in my life growing up. But yeah, I don't know. So I'm rambling there, but there's just so many levels to enjoy Norm. And I'm so glad I have all these videos. I've been watching interviews and all this stuff for the last couple of weeks and enjoying now. I think I'm kind of over the immediate grief phase and I'm just kind of like appreciating him. And I'm watching a lot of these old clips that I never even saw. Like I watched him on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I watched him on The Match Show from 2008, I think. You know, and all these old interviews and stuff. And I'm just enjoying it. I'm just appreciating it. And that's where I'm at now with it. But a couple things I want to say sort of in relation to me and this podcast and Norm's life, his career, and his untimely death. Well, let me say this. So there's this one interview in particular, and I'm going to include the link for this in the show notes, but this one interview where he was being interviewed by two radio people, and especially this woman was just so obnoxious and just such a normie, you know, just like a totally normal straight white female in America, like just so normal. And then they're asking questions to Norm, and he's just so, they thought he was doing a bit. And I guess you should always be wondering if he's doing a bit, because sometimes he does that. But he was saying, like, no, I'm not doing a bit. He's just giving his answers. And to me, like, the conclusions that the woman was coming to in the interview, and the other guy as well, and even the people calling in on the radio show, were just basically like, Norm, why are you so depressed? Why are you such a downer? Why are you so miserable? And she literally said the word that, it's a phrase that we bring up in the MGTOW circles, but like, who hurt you? Who hurt you? And, Norm's response was generally like, no, it's not that somebody hurt me, and it's not that I'm depressed. I think he took a lot of time to himself to just think about life and death and people and meaning and purpose and, of course, comedy. But if you take that much time to really think about these things so deeply on the level that he was, like, you're going to come to some different conclusions. And I think one of the reasons why most people don't come to these kind of conclusions, in fact, they're very uncomfortable with these conclusions, because they're harsh. And maybe life at its core reality is actually harsh. But people don't want to think about that shit. So they busy themselves with activities and hobbies and sex and drugs, alcohol, like football games, basketball, sports, like movies, music, like, just, is that it? Like, we just busy ourselves with all this stuff to basically distract us from a certain harshness of life, or a certain bleak, sort of pointless, ultimate futility of our life. And I'm not saying that you should just dwell on the futility of your existence or anything. And I don't even think that was Norm's point in this interview. And I encourage you to go click on it and listen to the full interview. I might include a short clip here or there in this episode here right now. But
life is, if you know mathematics, a fraction of infinity is zero, no matter what the fraction is. You know what I'm saying? No. You could live 100 years, 1,000 years, 1 billion years. It's all zero if it's on a continuum of eternity. So it doesn't matter what you do or what you don't do.
I loved how he was thinking about things. And it's like, I think about that stuff too from time to time. And again, the point wasn't to dwell on it, but it's just kind of like making these points known. One line he had in there was like, if you know mathematics, a fraction of infinity is zero, no matter what the fraction is. So in a sense, he was saying, like, it doesn't matter what you do or what you don't do, which is true. Mathematically speaking, it's true. Your life is a drop in an infinite ocean. 1,000 years from now, especially if you don't have kids and descendants and somebody down the line becomes somebody famous and important. If you don't have kids and you die in this life, and your siblings and your parents die and your uncles and everything, like, 1,000 years from now, nobody will even know that you existed. And I don't say that to depress you, because this is the same thing for you listening right now as it is for me. It's like, that is the nature of reality. You don't have to get depressed about that, though. It's this level of being in touch with reality, but not being destroyed by it. Even if it's something uncomfortable or harsh or whatever. And I just loved listening to Norm in this interview, because I was like, wow, he is dropping some philosophical bombs here. And the interviewers, the chick and the guy, like, they just couldn't handle it. And all she could say, the guy's like, are you doing a bit? And then all she could say is like, it's just like, you're so pathetic. You live at home. You don't have any stuff by yourself. You don't even have a pet. Like, you don't have sex. And he goes on a little bit about his views on sex. But, it's just like, it's just funny to me. It's like, here is this genuine guy expressing really deep thoughts, and to say those things and not be depressed, but just stating them as matters of fact. that are undisputable, but they just didn't want to hear it. And most people don't want to hear that kind of shit. And then I also realized a lot of stuff I talk about on this podcast, most people don't want to hear this shit.
You don't want to hear that shit.
And I don't mean to bring up stuff on this podcast that's like so dark and depressing. I mean, honestly, like I went back and listened to a little bit of my Before Sunset episode from a couple weeks ago, and I realized like I was bitching and moaning about the COVID mandates and my gym being shut down and them taking away my freedoms in my life here. I was bitching and moaning about that for 20 minutes at least before I started talking about Before Sunset, which is the point of that episode. And I was kind of like, I got to get better about that, you know. And I've had a lot of thoughts about this podcast lately, and you know, obviously it's been now a week and a half or so since I last recorded. So I've kind of taken a little mini break here, but I think I was a little bit exhausted. I did a 3-hour episode with Tommy Danger. I did a 3-hour interview with Tyler the next day. And then a couple days later, and I'd prepared for this third interview. I wanted to have my shit together and do some research. And I did a 3-hour interview with Henrik to debate the vaccine passports. And so that's 9 hours of me just sitting with people and talking to them and recording it. And I don't just download it and upload it and that's it. Like, no, I edit stuff out, long pauses, I put in, and especially in the Henrik episode, I put in a lot of clips and supporting materials and relevant links and all that stuff. So there's, you know, then that takes another 3 hours for each episode. And I'm just like, wow, you know, it's a lot of time and energy that I put into that. And I feel like the Henrik episode was a little bit of my sort of battle of the bulge. Like I put everything into it that I could to make the case against the vaccines, or not even specifically against the vaccines, but against the vaccine mandate. Because if you want to go get the vaccine, whether you've done research or not, more power to you. It's your life, your body, your choice. You go do what you want to do. But the fact that it's mandated for everybody and nobody has a say in the matter, you know, even though it's not even in unison with the science, which basically says people who've already had COVID have better immunity than those people with the vaccine. So there's no reason for people who already had it to get the vaccine. Like, but you're telling me they can't go to a restaurant and all that stuff. But anyway, I'm not going to get all into that now.
Not got that.
You know, not going to repeat and rehash because I said all that. You know, I'm glad I had one dedicated episode where I said all that. It's a 3-hour plus episode or whatever. And, you know, and I passed that around and, you know, I kind of realized like the level of tiredness that I had after recording all those. And I'm proud of those episodes. I enjoyed the interviews and I think they're great episodes and great content. And I put that out there. But, you know, the fact that I don't have thousands of listeners or hundreds of listeners, and I have to look at the growth and that kind of thing. I have to look at things in terms of the time and energy it takes out of me. And I don't want to go too much further with that now because the 50th episode is coming up. I'm hoping to interview Christina Weber, who I had on the podcast last year. We're going to do a sequel, follow up to that, and I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully we'll be interviewing her in a couple days. So that will be episode 49. And then before I go on this trip south, I want to be able to record the 50th episode of the Introversion Podcast. And that will be sort of the dedicated episode where all of these thoughts that I've been mulling over for the last couple of weeks and stuff triggered by Norm Macdonald and these 3-hour interviews I had and talking so much in so much depth about COVID and all of this stuff. Like it's kind of, I got a lot to say about that. And, you know, I really wanted to talk about Norm and get this episode out there. And I am looking forward to my episode with Christina coming up. But that 50th episode for me is going to be really pivotal, you know, because I feel like I'm at a moment in time where I just want to look back at 50 episodes in about a year and a half of this podcast. And I want to reflect and talk about what I've liked, what I haven't liked, and how it's grown, how it's changed, how it's evolved. So I want to talk about that, the past element of the Introversion Podcast. I want to talk about where it's at right now. And then I'm going to want to talk about the future and where I see it going. And a lot of that has been informed by this Norm Macdonald loss. And yeah, so bringing it back, I'm not going to say anything more about the Introversion Podcast and the future of that for now, because that's coming in a couple episodes. But for right now, back to Norm. And maybe this will be kind of my concluding thought for this episode. But, as an artist, whether I'm doing design or animation or podcasting or whatever it is I'm doing, drawing, painting, or making music, which is something I really want to start getting into. But as I'm sure a lot of artists struggle and deal with this, like a lot of us, especially like commercial designers and things like that, like we have the skill set to do this for a living and basically make other people's dreams happen, or work for some big company where you're just furthering their bottom line.
Is this good for the company?
Right? You're working for a pharmaceutical company, you're working for whatever, like you're essentially a pair of hands. Even though you're a quote unquote creative professional, it's not really about you or your ideas or your passion or your voice. It's more about the company you're working for or the clients you're working for and what they want. That's why they're paying you, is to be a pair of hands to do their thing. And this is something I've been, I don't want to say struggling with, but like dealing with for a while now and trying to figure out the right balance. And I've been feeling kind of lately like I finished another little client project here and there, and there's a part of me that just feels like going cold turkey and not doing any more client work for the foreseeable future. And maybe it's a temporary thing, or if things go well with my actual purely creative pursuits, then maybe I'll never have to turn back to doing client work. I don't know. But I feel like there's only one way to find out, right? And that is to just go for it, And I believe in myself.
I believe I can fly.
I believe in myself. Like my abilities, my vision, my ideas. But this is where it kind of comes back to Norm Macdonald. It's like, I don't think for Norm it was necessarily about impressing the whole world or having 1 million followers or 1 billion followers. I think his guiding light was just to be funny, as he saw humor, as he saw what funny is. And there was a certain purity to that. And that's why I say I think that I felt that was his guiding light, his guiding principle was, I think this is funny. I'm going to make this joke. And when people come and tell him, like, don't make that joke, and he's kind of like, fuck off. Like, this is funny. I'm going to say this joke. It would be a pity. It would be a travesty, a tragedy to not tell this joke because it's funny and it should be put out there in the universe. Like, I get this sense that was sort of the general wavelength he operated on. And as I absorb that and think about that from my life, I feel like I self-censor too much, or I'm too busy doing mindless client work that I don't devote myself fully to my passion. And I have an array of passions that are all kind of interrelated, like music and pop culture, comedy, art, design, animation, video, like all these kind of things. And I've been alluding to this other project that I've been in the very early phases of starting the last few months. And I've finally been devoting more time to it recently, and it's coming together nicely, at least in terms of having a coming soon page, which I'm hoping to finish up tomorrow. So maybe by my 50th episode, I will have the name to finally reveal to you all, as well as the URL, so you can go to the site and sign up for the mailing list to be notified when it goes live, and it will actually have its own YouTube channel. So I can also point you to that to subscribe on YouTube for that. I'm really excited about that. But yeah, so the point is it's taking shape, it's getting there, and I'm excited because I feel it just around the corner.
I know it. Jeopardy's gonna call today, Billy. I can feel it.
You know, I think that is going to be sort of my primary passion project. And, but anyway, I don't want to get too much into this because this is going to be the 50th episode of the Introversion Podcast, where I talk about what the Introversion Podcast is and what it isn't, and what it is going to be and what it isn't going to be moving forward. But yeah, so Norm, that passion, that focus, that kind of like, I don't give a shit mentality. Like, this is funny, I'm going to say it, you know, and that was his driving, you know, that was his guiding light, I feel like. And I see that, and I see sort of the fruit of that. And when you look at somebody like Norm to the end of his life, like, and his legacy, and this is where I really am getting at in terms of where I want to wrap this up, is the legacy of Norm. And then me thinking about my own legacy. Like, what am I leaving behind in this world? And like, you know, God bless him. I have some good friends and family, and, you know, sometimes I share stuff with them with the podcast or art projects or whatever. And, you know, bless their heart, you know, as they say in the South or whatever, they don't really get it, sort of what I'm doing. You know, like, I have a very rare couple friends that really notice the little nuanced things that I do with my design, with the typography, the animation. Like, I obsess about these details, and there's a joy and a passion that I have in obsessing about these details. And I think probably with Norm, there was a lot of, like, he would probably spend a lot of time thinking about a joke or a bit or a routine. And I think most people, especially, I mean, obviously the people who don't like him, forget about them. Like, they just wouldn't give a shit what he does. But like, even amongst a lot of people who kind of liked him, like, hey, he's a funny guy, yeah, whatever. Like, I think he did a lot of shit that people just didn't really get. And I'm not even saying that I got everything he did. There's probably some things I missed, some little attentions to details that probably other comedians who have a very keen eye for it, like, who go through that process of creating jokes, they probably picked up on some little things and nuances that he did that I didn't. So, but I guess kind of what I'm getting here, and this is where I'm also going to get kind of Ayn Rand-ish about all this, is like sort of a man and his work, the craftsmanship, the passion, the attention to detail. I mean, I might have mentioned about this. My cousin Praveen told me a couple weeks ago, he gave me an honest criticism, and he talked about my perfectionism and how it might be holding me back. And, you know, I'm willing to take criticism, and especially from when it's from somebody who I respect and I love, and I know it's coming from a good place. They just want what's best for me. And I really kind of was mulling it over, you know, and I was talking about it with Irina from a few episodes ago, earlier in the podcast. You guys might remember. About introverts being so kind of OCD and obsessed with details and getting everything right. And I started to think, like, maybe I am too obsessive. Maybe I am too obsessed with details and artistic details and nuances and subtleties with my craft, with what I do, whether it's with podcasting or animation, video design, whatever. And like Praveen's point, when he saw me editing, one time when he was over at my apartment, he saw me editing, like fading out audio and of a music kind of fading out and cutting a clip. And so he got to see firsthand how I was preparing a podcast episode. And he was like, wow, dude, you did it quickly, but you just spent a minute like fine tuning that little bit. And from his perspective, he's like, I wouldn't even have noticed the difference. Like, whether you made that little edit or not. And I get it. Like, he wouldn't have noticed it, and most people wouldn't notice it. And that's where I start to think about, like, and I had been thinking for a solid week after he confronted me about this, about my perfectionism and how maybe it's doing me a disservice. And I thought, yeah, maybe I need to let go. I need to let go of wanting to do everything right. Maybe I need to embrace more just like doing something wrong, or if I type a typo, just staring at it and letting it be, and not obsessing about it. So I'm like, oh, I got to fix that typo, make it right, make it correct. You know, it's like I have this certain standard of excellence that for whatever reason it's in me, whether it's how I was raised or whatever the case, but like, I don't know. And I might do a dedicated episode just on perfectionism. I know the very first episode of the Introversion Podcast was about perfectionism. So you could go back and listen to that one because it was kind of a certain level of perfectionism prevented me from even starting this podcast in the first place. So I definitely think, you know, what is that quote? It's something like, perfect is often the enemy of progress, you know? So yeah, I'm keenly aware of that, but you know, so I started to think, yeah, maybe I need to just be a little more rough around the edges and not refine my content so much and not perfect everything so much because most people won't even notice it anyways. But if I can shave off minutes and seconds here and there, maybe I can actually churn out more work. So basically what we're talking about is maybe I could go more for quantity over quality, which for people who know me and everything that I've said on this podcast, like it should be quite apparent that I'm definitely have been for a long time more of a quality person over quantity. And that comes to with friendships as well and people out there. I know like I'd rather have a few close friends who are awesome people and we have a deep connection rather than have 2,000 friends who it's like whatever, you know? And I know this is textbook introvert though, right? INTJ. So it makes sense. But all that being said, you know, bringing it back to Norm here, I just look at Norm as a comedic genius, but a comedic craftsman, you know, like he loved what he did, you know, and if you listen to this interview where the lady was lambasting him, like the fact that he lives in an apartment, doesn't have pets, like doesn't have sex with girls and stuff, and he finds it repetitive, I think was the term he used, and just like kind of pointless. And, you know, there's a lot there that he said that this woman is calling him depressed and all this stuff, but I'm kind of like, it resonated with me. And, you know, it's just interesting to think about like what things motivate you as an individual or what are you really passionate about in life? And I'm the kind of person where I'm always thinking about those things anyways, but then looking at Norm's life and mourning the loss of his life, it has brought this back into the forefront of my thoughts where I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm starting to realize maybe that is my path forward, is to have a legacy somewhat like Norm Macdonald, where I really loved what I made and I really loved what I did with my time. And I had a voice and I created all this content and just like shared my ideas with the world. And it wasn't about likes, it wasn't about follows, and I gave up on that. And it was just about being true to myself and feeling proud of myself for the content that I create, the way I think Norm probably felt good about his body of work or his comedy in general, you know? And in that sense, again, I don't know him personally, but this is just me thinking out loud here about what I think his experience was like, you know, because when he flat out said, like, no, I'm not depressed.
You want nothing, and you just want to be depressed. You're depressed.
No, I'm not depressed at all.
Someone.
I'm in no ways depressed.
He knows what he loves in life, and he sees the meaninglessness of all these other things. And for him to say that out loud, like the interviewers just couldn't handle it. And a lot of people just can't handle that. And I listen to it, and I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. Because I feel very similarly, you know. And as I think about my life moving forward, it's definitely heading in an alternate path than what I would have expected 15, 20 years ago for my life. But yeah, I mean, I could branch out into a couple different podcast episodes here right now, but I'm not going to do that. So maybe these will be sort of follow-up episodes to this as I sort of explain my path moving forward. And like I said, episode 50 is going to be all about this podcast and looking back and looking forward as well. So, yeah, Norm Macdonald, that's a huge loss for everybody. I'm really sad about it, but it is what it is, you know, it's part of life. And I can't finish this episode without mentioning one other comedian, because this conversation came up. I was chatting with Ryan the day after Norm Macdonald died, Ryan, who was on this podcast last year. And talking about, I think I told him explicitly, I said, you know, I don't think I've been this impacted by a comedian's death since Patrice O'Neill. Yeah, so I couldn't do this episode without mentioning Patrice O'Neill, because I think even more than Norm Macdonald, I was more sad and just really bummed out for a while after Patrice O'Neill died, because I mean, I love Norm Macdonald, I love Patrice O'Neill, but like I feel like Patrice O'Neill was such a beast and just such a like, I mean, they're both I don't give a fuck kind of attitude guys, which I love, but like Patrice was just so crass and inappropriate and rough around the edges and harsh and speaking harsh truth. You couldn't believe the things he was saying out of his mouth. It's like, oh my God, is somebody even allowed to say that? Oh my shit. So, but I loved that bravery, you know, that attitude of like, I don't give a shit. And it was kind of that same thing with Norm. It's like, he thinks it's funny, it's true, he's going to say it. And sadly, I just felt like, especially now in the world we live in today, where everything is so fucking woke, politically correct bullshit, like, I would love to see what Patrice O'Neill would be saying today. And of course, I would love to hear what Norm Macdonald would say about any of this stuff today. But it was different, because Norm Macdonald was not as much like he wasn't as much of a commentator on society and the state of affairs, and, you know, but Patrice was. Like, I think Patrice, especially not in his stand-up specials, but like on his radio interviews and all that stuff, like he would just let it fly. And I remember after he died, I listened to Patrice O'Neill videos on YouTube for weeks. And I should probably go back and listen to some more of those, you know, but it's been a while. But yeah, sorry, I just had to mention Patrice O'Neill because Patrice O'Neill and Norm Macdonald, and funnily enough, the third comedian I would mention who I was most bummed out when they died was George Carlin. George Carlin would probably be the third in that triumvirate of comedians who are in three of my top favorite comedians of all time. But the funny thing is about George Carlin is I was a Christian my whole life. So a lot of the atheists and stuff that George Carlin said, it didn't resonate with me so much. I wasn't like deeply offended by him. I know my dad like hated his guts and hated everybody like that. These very outspoken atheists. For me, I was like, I'm a Christian, so I don't really agree with what he's saying about religion, but you know, he's a smart guy, kind of a funny comedian, at least about other things. But then obviously, so George Carlin died on June 22nd, 2008. And I came out of Christianity in 2007, 2008, around that time. So I kind of really dove deep into George Carlin later, sort of as I entered into my atheism and my agnosticism, and sort of as I got red-pilled and black-pilled and all this shit. So I really appreciated George Carlin after he died. It's almost like I discovered all of his work much later after he died, but, you know, once I discovered it, it meant a lot to me. And he's another one of those guys like Patrice O'Neill where I would love, I mean, even more than Norm, I would love to hear what Patrice O'Neill and George Carlin had to say about society in 2021. You know, that is why I wish they were alive today, because we need more voices like that, and I would love to hear their voice. I would love to hear their material and their ideas, their way of thinking. And I think that's the thing. I mean, bringing it back to Norm here, like I just really appreciate, whether it's people I know personally or celebrities or artists or whatever out there, it's like certain people's minds, certain people's voices, they have such an impact. They're so bold, they're so sharp, they're so refined, they're so funny, they're so whatever. And it's like, I have such deep respect and longing and joy and appreciation for that when that person dies, that's why it feels like such a huge loss to me, is because that's the end of their story. And, not just is it the end of their physical life, but it just means that's the end of, there will be no more new anything from them. That voice has been snuffed out forever. So all we have are what they produced during their lifetime, and thank goodness for that we have YouTube and videos and audio recording devices and all of the stuff where we can continue to absorb and enjoy the works of the great minds, the great artists. And same thing goes for authors. I mean, I know I used to read a lot more than I do recently, but like Ayn Rand was one of those great minds, and Orwell and all these things. And like, how relevant is everything Orwell wrote about like today? And, but this is also why it pisses me off when it comes down to censorship and people talking about canceling Dr. Seuss and rewriting his books and, pulling movies and whatever. What was that? The movie with Scarlett, Gone with the Wind or whatever. Like, all of these bits of history and works of art from the past, like even well before my lifetime, I'm like, I just don't like this sort of whitewashing of history and the past and like trying to remove things. I want to hear the genuine voice of that author, of that artist, of that comedian, whether other people like it or not. Like, maybe there's something in there that's a gem for me. And the only way I'll know it and experience it is if I have access to reading that book or hearing that stand-up comedy clip or seeing their movie or looking at their painting or whatever. It's like, and this is going to get onto a larger point where I actually wanted to do a specific episode about art and creative process, but also just kind of this idea of creating in general. So rather than make this a super long episode, I think I'm going to call it quits there. But yeah, so George Carlin, Patrice O'Neill, and Norm Macdonald. Norm Macdonald, the most recent one to go. But anyway, I just wanted to say those things. I mean, I'll include the links in the description. Crowder did a much better breakdown of Norm's career and the perceptions of him versus who he actually was. And there's tons of interviews. If you're curious, you can go online, listen to all of Norm Macdonald's old interviews and his old clips. And specifically this one interview that I'm including in the show notes and that I was talking about today, where this woman and this guy were really lambasting him while he was just dropping this philosophical knowledge. Check that one out. But yeah, I've added my take, my 2 cents to the into the ether with everyone's Norm tributes and reflections and remembrance videos. So yeah, I will leave it at that. Next up, hopefully, will be an interview with Christina Weber. I think we're going to get into men and women and relationships and life and love and meaning and purpose, and should be good. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, so that's all. I will miss Norm Macdonald and Maybe you will too, maybe not. But he was a great comedian, great mind, and he will be sorely missed forever. So, yep. That's all for now. Bye. Hey, you. Yes, you. I just wanted to say thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're currently listening on. That way you can obviously get notified as soon as new episodes arrive. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and consider writing a brief review. It just takes a second, and it really helps in order to get this podcast ranking higher so that more people can discover it. And the better this podcast is doing, the more prominent guests we can get on the show, and also the more time I can devote to it, which means more episodes and better episodes. And speaking of better episodes, what would you like to see more of on the show? Are there specific topics you'd love to see covered? Do you have thoughts of your own on the subjects discussed today? I'd love to hear from you. Just shoot an email to podcast@introversion.com. Or you can reach out to me on social media. I'm Jay Caslow on pretty much every platform, Twitter, Instagram, and the rest. And last but not least, if you've been enjoying listening to the podcast and also checking out the daily blog at introversion.com, I invite you to visit patreon.com/introversion, where you can become an official Introversion patron for as little as $3 a month. That's literally 10 cents a day. Anyway, just consider it. Otherwise, just click like, share this podcast with friends and family who you think would enjoy it. Anyway, have a good one. Until next time.